Welcome back to Men and Motors, and today you join me with something a little bit different than cars. It's the Honda XL750 Transalp. First impressions of this bike are rather good. I really do love the colour scheme, especially with this matte black paint, the black wheels and the black engine components. It really does set it off, especially with that jacked up ride height. It just has that off-roading presence that just looks fantastic. This is the base model of the XL750 Transalp, and it costs £9,499. However, you can spec that up with a few added extras, but if you want to take a view of the Bogo model, this is basically it, and I think it's more than enough bike for that sort of money. And to be fair, it's a good price when you position it in the market against other competitors for adventure bikes. The Transalp is based on the Honda Hornet, and it pretty much shares the same engine, running gear, electrics and chassis, albeit the chassis is a little bit different. It's a bit more beefed up just to take in that extra strength needed on surroundings such as this, especially when you're not on tarmac. It's powered by a 750cc, 270-degree crank, 8-valve twin engine, which produces 95 brake horsepower, 55 foot-pounds of torque, and a top speed of 135 miles per hour. I should also add, it weighs in at 208 kilograms, which is a bit on the heavy side for a bike, but when you compare it to other models, it sits right in the middle, and when you're on it, it doesn't feel heavy at all. If you're buying a bike like this, you're not going to be chasing speed, so those figures aren't going to blow you away. But what I can tell you is, it's more than enough to propel this bike forward in a straight line, in some nice corners on tarmac, and especially on bumpy tracks such as this. It really is a nice power to weight ratio, and you can't complain. The gearbox is 6-speed, and as standard, you get an anti-slipper clutch. Now, I want to address the elephant in the room, because when you look at this bike, it's evident that something isn't symmetrical, and that is the wheels. The rear wheel is 18 inches and the front wheel is 21 inches, and there's a massive reason for that, and that is comfort and a cushioned ride. Having a bigger wheel at the front just simply takes all the vibration out of your arms when you're on bumpy tracks, and it does lead to that ultimate comfortable feeling when you're pushing the bike to its limits. Whilst we're on the subject of wheels, I do have to say the disc brakes are absolute dinner plates. You get twin 310mm brakes on the front and a single 256mm disc brake on the rear. You get twin pot calipers on the front and a single pot on the back, and it comes with ABS, which is something that I'm clearly lacking. And by ABS, I mean ABS. You do get it on the front and back, and it can be fine-tuned and tweaked if you don't like how reactive it is and how much it kicks in, which we have found when riding it on gravel, it does tend to take over a bit too much. But one of the beautiful things with this bike is it's very, very adaptable. You have a series of different driver modes, which I'll talk you through in a moment, and you can really trim it down and tweak the throttle response just for it to ride exactly how you want it to. On the front, you get upside down 41mm forks, and putting that with a combination of a big wheel on the front, it really does lead to a cushion ride, which ultimately means more time spent in the saddle, which is what you want to do with a bike like this, if the weather doesn't get in the way, of course. From factory, the Transalp is a very customizable bike. Like I said, this is the base model, but you can add some lovely crash bars on here with some low mounted spot lamps if you enjoy a bit of night riding or when the sun's going down. You can add saddlebags to the rear, you can add some heated grips onto the bike, and you can have some wind deflectors onto your wrist, which is something I would probably add if I was buying one of these, because the hands just get so cold this time of year when riding if you haven't got heated gloves. But if you could add them to the bike, I really do think it's worth it, and there are many different ways you can configure it. Fuel tank capacity is 16.9 litres, and for that you get roughly around 249 miles of range. That's if you don't thrash it, of course. And whilst we're on the subject of fuel, I might as well mention the MPG, but before I do, get in the comments below and guess the figures of what you think the MPG is on this bike, because I was absolutely amazed. The MPG is 67 miles per gallon, which is absolutely amazing because it works out at roughly 10 pence a mile to run. And let's face it, 10 pence a mile, when you're on a bike like this on lovely country roads and lovely weather, it just leads to smiles per gallon for a very, very competitive price. And it does make me think, why don't more people use bikes to get from A to B? Because it's cheap, it's fun. The only thing is, it is slightly dangerous, but in open areas, unless you're an absolute imbecile in the way you ride, there's very little that can happen. Now, as time's moved on with motorbikes, we've started to see a decline in analog speedos and dials, and they're getting replaced with LED screens, something which I didn't really think I'd bond well with, but the fact that you can change it and tweak it to how you want really does scream excellence. Now, if I just turn this on, you get a lovely little Transalp animation that comes on the screen. You've got the speedo, the revs, it tells you what gear it's in, and then the best thing is there's a button here that says mode, and when you flick through the modes you have 5 different driving modes. One of them, which I think is the best, but as I just cycle through, you've got standard, rain, gravel, user. Now this is the best one, I think, because you can actually tweak all the settings in the user mode. And what that means is you can change the harshness of the throttle response, you can change when the ABS kicks in, you can just pretty much tweak it to exactly how you want. Now, certain modes do feel better in certain environments, but I think as you learn to live with this bike and the more you ride it, you'll start to enjoy it a bit more when you tweak it and set it up to exactly how you want. Now, I should probably talk about seat height. It's 33 inches or around 850 mil, which is a little on the high side, but for someone like myself that's 6'3", it really is a nice position. If I get on, you can see I can quite easily flat foot this bike, especially if I'm sat forward, and it does feel nice and comfortable. Now, I can move that around very easily, but I think somebody that's probably around 5'8", you might be on the balls of your feet, but for someone like me, it's perfect, and you feel comfortable and stable when you come to a stop. Whilst I'm on here, I must say the seat is very comfortable, and the travel on these forks is just absolutely fantastic. And again, you can really see how cushioned this ride is. One thing I may mention is, if you're a little on the heavier side like myself, obviously when you are on the seat, the lower the bike sits into the ground. So for once, adding weight to yourself might be a perk. That's not health advice, by the way, because I'm not a doctor, but I just thought it might be worth mentioning. The visor looks kind of pointless, but it does actually do its job. It keeps the wind from hitting your chest, albeit you still see it in your face, unless you do tuck behind the handlebars, but it does serve a purpose. The extra wide fuel tank and fenders also protect you from the wind. However, like I said before, if I was having one of these bikes, I would definitely spec it with heated grips and the handle wind deflectors, because your hands do take the brash of it. I mean, yesterday when I was out on the bike, you could barely move your fingers after a ride, but was 4 hours in the saddle, and I tell you what, comfortable, pain-free, ache-free, lovely thing to ride. One thing I do want to talk about is this headlight. It's super bright and it does look the part. However, I do feel that Honda have been a little bit lazy just taking this off the CB750X and just slapping it straight onto the Transalp. A bit of different design could have been added in there, but again, it's only a little niggle, it's only preference, and I'm very sure with time, as it moves on and facelift models come out in the newer shapes, this will probably change. One great thing are these side lights. They stay on all the time, and when you're riding at night, it just looks really stealth with the big LED light shining through the front and the 2 little orange lights. And if you do put the indicator on, you can see they basically change. Lovely bit of design. Now, I know you're itching to find out what it sounds like, so I'll show you. As standard, you get a lovely little purr. A few people have said this is quite a quiet bike. I don't think that's the case. If I do give it a little rev, I don't think you can moan at that. It sounds lovely. The red line on this bike is 10,000 RPM, and you do get that lovely induction noise, especially when you get up in the higher range of revs. Anything between 6,000 to 10,000, you do really feel it pick up, and that's where it's most reactive with the horsepower, and you tend to pick up an extra 20 after about 6k on the revs. On the brakes, you get 6 different settings, and that's to go a lot easier on the wrist, because we know as men, we have a habit of being quite hard on the wrists, and that's the last thing you want to be doing when you're riding a bike. No innuendos meant there. But you can tweak the reach on the brakes, so basically if you've got too much of a far reach, you can tweak it in so you're straight on the bite point of the brakes, and it is just, again, a more customizable thing, and you can tweak it with the way it rides. Clutch is very, very soft, and it is cable operated, and you know what? I really do think it's brilliant. And with all that said, I think it's about time we took it for a road test. Setting off on the Transalp is an absolute dream. The clutch is smooth and extremely light on your fingers, and it picks up speed fast. Like I said earlier in this video, it really is a comfortable bike, and with soft suspension it does feel fun when accelerating, especially with a forwards and backwards rock when changing gear. Gear changes are smooth, and like most bikes, comes with a lovely clunk to confirm that you've gone into gear. The sound isn't on the loud side and it isn't on the quiet side either. It is a nice touch and it does sing out a lovely note, especially when you're getting into the higher revs. Given it was a wet day with greasy road conditions, the bike did feel rather planted, even with partial knobbly tyres. Don't get me wrong, if you push it, then of course you will slip and slide around, but it does fill you with confidence that this bike is aimed at all weathers. And let's face it, especially where I live in the north of England, it's always moist. But where this bike really comes to life is off the beaten track, even in a downpour. With the utilisation of different riding modes such as gravel, this is where the Transalp makes riding on loose slippery surfaces fun and safe. It feathers and feels the traction control and the ABS as and when it thinks you need it. However, if you think it's too much, you can go full ASBO mode and turn off all the riding aids. Today, the weather is grim and there is no better way of putting the Transalp to the test than muddy puddles, green lanes, hills and dirt tracks. The massive upside down forks really cushion the ride and help you gain control on technical terrains. And don't forget guys, they say the best views come from the hardest climbs, and the climbs are a hell of a lot easier when taking the Transalp off-road. Now the Transalp can cope with light off-road work, but it isn't going to take you as far as a scrambler or an enduro would. But it does allow you to explore other terrain rather than just tarmac and chase down those landmarks in the distance. In summary, it's a great all-rounder, and for the price, can you really complain? So to summarise, I think this is a fantastic bike, and for £9,500 you can't really complain. It's a good all-rounder and it's something you should really consider buying if you're in the market for one. Let us know in the comments what you thought of this, and if you want to see what Men and Motors thought of this over 8 years ago, click up here, and if you want to see my friend Jim getting a bit fiddly with a dolphin, click down here. But in the meantime, hit subscribe and we'll see you all very soon.